The High Command had over 14,000 species across the galaxy, and none had ever posed less of a threat than the humans of Sol 3. Their preliminary scans showed a species barely 2 centuries into industrial development, still using primitive chemical rockets and crude nuclear weapons. The assessment report filed by Scout Commander Al was dismissive at best. Fragile bipedal mammals, he had written in his official documentation. Average of roughly 80 rotations, weak bone density, vulnerable skin covering, and an alarming tendency towards self-destruction. Military capabilities are laughably primitive. Recommendation: minimal security presence required for occupation protocols. The Galactic Hegemony had built its empire on the systematic conquest of lesser species. They were methodical, efficient, and utterly convinced of their superiority. Their plasma weapons could cut through starship hulls, their shields could deflect nuclear blasts, and their warriors were bred from birth for combat. Humans, with their metal projectile weapons and chemical explosives, seemed like children playing with sticks. Admiral Orr stood before the tactical display in his flagship's command center, watching the blue-green marble of Earth rotate slowly in the holographic projection. 300 hegemony vessels hung in formation around the planet, their sleek hulls gleaming with advanced alloys that human weapons couldn't even scratch. The invasion fleet was overkill by any reasonable measure, but the Admiral believed in thorough work. "Deploy the occupation forces to the major population centers," he commanded, his 4 arms moving gracefully across the control interface. "Begin with the locations they call New York, London, Tokyo, and Moscow. Establish control grids and begin the pacification protocols." The hegemony had perfected conquest over. They would target government centers, disable communication networks, and demonstrate overwhelming force until the natives surrendered. Most species capitulated within hours once they understood the futility of resistance. The few that didn't were quickly crushed by superior technology and tactics. Lieutenant Commander H monitored the initial descent from her position at the sensor array. The first wave of descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain, carrying thousands of hegemony shock troopers. Their orders were simple: secure key infrastructure, neutralize any military response, and await further instructions. The humans had been observed enough to know their basic military doctrine relied heavily on centralized command structures and conventional tactics. "Landing zones secured," reported Captain from the surface. "Minimal resistance encountered. Their primitive aircraft posed no threat to our shields, proceeding with urban pacification." What the hegemony commanders didn't understand was that they had made their first critical error before the invasion even began. Their scouts had observed human military exercises, studied their conventional forces, and analyzed their standard doctrine. They had watched armies march in formation, observed tank columns advancing across open terrain, and recorded air forces engaging in traditional air-to-air combat. What they hadn't seen were the humans who fought differently. In the mountains of Afghanistan, a weathered man named watched the alien descend through an old pair of binoculars. 23 years of Special Forces operations had taught him to read terrain, enemy movement patterns, and tactical vulnerabilities that others missed. The aliens had landed in predictable formations, secured obvious objectives, and moved with the confidence of a force that had never faced asymmetric warfare. Wasn't alone. Scattered across the planet were thousands of individuals who had learned to fight in ways that didn't appear in military manuals. Former special operations soldiers, intelligence operatives, resistance fighters from forgotten conflicts, and hunters who knew how to track dangerous prey through hostile terrain. They had been studying the invaders for the 3 days since the ships appeared in Earth's skies, and they had reached the same conclusion. The aliens fought like a conventional military force that had never encountered an unconventional enemy. The hegemony's first wave had taken the major cities with minimal casualties. Government buildings fell within hours, communication centers were seized, and the human military's attempts at organized resistance were quickly overwhelmed by superior technology. To Admiral, or monitoring the operation from orbit, everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans were responding exactly as predicted, throwing their conventional forces against hegemony shields and weapons in futile frontal assaults. But in the wilderness areas between cities, a different kind of war was beginning. Sarah had spent 12 years hunting wolves in the Siberian wilderness before joining the Russian. She understood patience, stealth, and the art of becoming invisible in hostile terrain. From her position in a snow-covered ravine outside Vladivostok, she watched hegemony patrols move through the forest with the casual confidence of predators who had never been prey. The aliens wore advanced armor that could deflect bullets and energy weapons, carried plasma rifles that could burn through steel, and moved in coordinated formations that spoke of extensive training. But they moved like soldiers who had always fought other soldiers on open battlefields. They didn't check the spaces that weren't obvious threats, didn't vary their patrol patterns, and never looked up into the tree canopy where a patient sniper might wait for hours. Sarah's rifle was nothing special by galactic standards, a modified with armor-piercing rounds that wouldn't penetrate alien shields on a direct hit. But she wasn't aiming for direct hits. 3 days of observation had shown her that the aliens' shields had blind spots at joint connections, and their helmet displays created reflection patterns that revealed sight lines. More importantly, their formations always included a communications specialist who stayed slightly behind the main group, monitoring multiple data feeds that made him less aware of his immediate surroundings. The shot was taken from 800 meters through a gap in the trees that would only exist for 3 seconds as the patrol moved through a specific clearing. The bullet struck the communications specialist's shield generator at the exact angle needed to cause a catastrophic overload. The resulting explosion took out 2 other soldiers and left the patrol's coordination network in chaos. By the time the hegemony soldiers identified the shot's origin, Sarah was already moving through underground tunnels that had been used for smuggling operations during the Soviet era. She would surface 3 kilometers away, establish a new position, and wait for the next patrol. The aliens would adapt, but adaptation took time, and time was something the resistance could use. Similar scenes were playing out across the planet. In the jungles of Colombia, former FARC fighters who had spent decades battling government forces began teaching alien patrol patterns to local hunters. In the mountains of Pakistan, veterans shared knowledge of improvised explosive devices with engineers who understood alien technology. In the American Southwest, Native American trackers began mapping safe routes through terrain that alien sensors couldn't properly scan. The hegemony's initial reports continued to be optimistic. Casualties were within acceptable parameters, major objectives had been secured, and human resistance was fragmenting as expected. But the nature of those casualties was beginning to concern field commanders who actually bothered to analyze the data. Captain studied the tactical display in his command post, noting the pattern of losses over the past week. 17 patrols had been attacked by unknown forces using techniques that didn't match any recorded human military doctrine. The attacks showed sophisticated understanding of hegemony equipment limitations, precise timing that indicated extensive surveillance, and escape routes that suggested intimate knowledge of local terrain. "These aren't random ambushes," he reported to Admiral or during the daily briefing. "The attacks are coordinated, precise, and conducted by individuals with extensive combat experience. Our intelligence assessment may have been incomplete." Admiral or dismissed the concern with a gesture of his primary arms. "Isolated resistance cells are expected during any occupation. Deploy additional patrols, establish observation posts, and increase security sweeps. Any primitive species can produce a few competent fighters." But concerns were validated the following day when an entire supply convoy disappeared while traveling between Moscow and Petersburg. The convoy had been escorted by 2 full squads of hegemony Marines, protected by mobile shield generators, and monitored by aerial reconnaissance drones. The route had been cleared by advanced scouts and declared secure by all standard protocols. The convoy simply vanished during a routine travel segment through rural forest. No distress signals were transmitted, no evidence of a battle was found, and the only trace of 50 soldiers and their equipment was a crater where the lead vehicle had been. Investigation teams found signs that the attack had been conducted with precise knowledge of convoy timing, equipment capabilities, and escort procedures. The humans responsible had used the terrain itself as a weapon. A carefully placed explosive charge had collapsed a section of road into a concealed ravine, separating the convoy's vehicles during the crucial seconds when their shields were reconfiguring for the new terrain. The escort squads had been eliminated by crossfire from positions that provided overlapping fields of fire while offering multiple escape routes. The entire operation had taken less than 4 minutes and had been conducted with tools that registered as primitive on hegemony sensors. studied the intelligence reports that were beginning to circulate through resistance networks. The aliens were adapting to conventional ambush tactics, but they were still thinking like a military force that had always fought other military forces. They increased patrol sizes, varied routes, and established better communication protocols, all of which were sensible responses that would have defeated any conventional insurgency. But the humans fighting them weren't following conventional insurgency doctrine either. In northern Canada, a team led by former Canadian JTF-2 operators had developed techniques for attacking alien aircraft that relied on understanding energy signatures rather than targeting visible profiles. Their modified surface-to-air missiles couldn't penetrate alien shields, but they could overload shield generators by creating multiple simultaneous impacts that forced power distribution beyond design tolerances. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal hunters were teaching resistance fighters how to become invisible to alien sensors by understanding the electromagnetic spectrum differences between human and alien vision. The aliens' advanced sensors were designed to detect threats that other technologically advanced species might pose, not humans who could mask their heat signatures with mud and clay while moving through terrain they understood better than any orbital scanning system could map. The resistance was learning, adapting, and evolving faster than the hegemony's command structure could process. Each successful attack provided intelligence about alien weaknesses, equipment limitations, and tactical assumptions. More importantly, each victory demonstrated that the supposedly superior invaders could be defeated by individuals who understood how to fight asymmetric warfare. But the hegemony was beginning to understand that their initial assessment had been flawed in fundamental ways. The humans weren't just resisting conquest, they were getting better at it with each engagement. Their attacks were becoming more sophisticated, their intelligence networks more extensive, and their tactical innovations more deadly. Admiral Orr called an emergency strategy session as reports of resistance activity across all occupied territories. The numbers were still small in galactic terms, perhaps a few thousand active resistance fighters on a planet of billions, but their effectiveness was far beyond what any species profile had predicted. Recommend immediate escalation to full pacification protocols, advised his Chief of Staff, Colonel X. Deploy orbital bombardment assets to eliminate resistance strongholds and implement planetary surveillance networks. The humans are proving more resourceful than anticipated, but they cannot withstand orbital strikes. The Admiral considered this recommendation carefully. Orbital bombardment would certainly eliminate resistance activity, but it would also destroy much of the planet's infrastructure and population that the hegemony intended to exploit. The conquest was supposed to be profitable, not Pyrrhic. Negative, he decided. Deploy additional ground forces and implement enhanced security measures. These are still primitive mammals using chemical weapons and metal projectiles. Increase the occupation force by 50% and begin systematic clearing operations in all rural sectors. What Admiral Orr didn't understand was that he had just made his second critical error. The resistance had been counting on exactly this response. More ground forces meant more targets, more predictable patrol patterns, and more opportunities to capture alien equipment for reverse engineering. Enhanced security measures meant more rigid procedures that could be studied and exploited by fighters who specialized in adaptive tactics. The war was about to enter a new phase, and the hegemony was still fighting the wrong enemy with the wrong assumptions. They were about to discover what happened when an advanced military force encountered humans who had spent generations learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than they were. The galaxy was about to get a very different education about Earth's apex predators than the one their initial assessments had provided. The reinforcements arrived with characteristic hegemony efficiency. 200 additional ships disgorged 50,000 fresh troops onto Earth's surface, equipped with the latest anti-insurgency technology and briefed on the new threat assessment protocols. Admiral Orr watched the deployment with satisfaction, confident that overwhelming force would crush the primitive resistance that had been causing minor difficulties for his occupation forces. The humans had other plans. Doctor had spent 15 years studying explosive chemistry for mining operations before the invasion. Now she sat in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Mexico City, teaching a group of former cartel enforcers how to synthesize compounds that could overload alien shield generators. The chemistry wasn't particularly complex, once you understood the harmonic frequencies that the shields used to deflect energy weapons. The aliens designed their shields to stop plasma bolts and particle beams, she explained to the assembled fighters, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. But they never encountered someone who understood how to create shaped charges that pulse at exactly the right frequency to cause harmonic resonance failure. Santos had lost his family in the first day of the invasion when alien forces leveled half of Guadalajara to establish a command center. His background running security for drug cartels had taught him patience, brutality, and the importance of understanding your enemy's weaknesses before you struck back. He listened to his explanation with the focused attention of a man who had found his purpose. "How many do we need?" he asked, studying the chemical formulas she had written on a salvaged whiteboard. 12 simultaneous detonations within a 50-meter radius, replied. The shield generators will try to compensate for the first few, but the cascade effect will overwhelm their power distribution systems. After that, they're just soldiers in fancy armor. The tunnel fell silent except for the distant rumble of alien transport vehicles moving through the city above. The resistance fighters understood the implications. They weren't just learning to fight aliens. They were learning to think like aliens, to understand technology that was centuries beyond human development, and to find the subtle flaws that no other species had ever thought to exploit. This was happening in hidden locations across the planet. In the sewers of Paris, former Foreign Legion explosives experts were teaching philosophy professors how to build devices that could disable alien communication arrays. In the caves of Afghanistan, tribal elders were sharing knowledge of terrain and weather patterns with quantum physicists who had figured out how to predict alien sensor blind spots. The resistance wasn't just growing, it was evolving into something that had never existed before in galactic history. Captain received the first reports of the new attacks 3 days after the reinforcements had deployed. Unlike the previous ambushes, which had relied on superior tactics and terrain knowledge, these strikes targeted the aliens' technological advantages directly. Shield generators were failing, communication networks were being disrupted, and weapons that had never malfunctioned in centuries of galactic warfare were somehow becoming unreliable in human hands. "Impossible," muttered technical specialist, as he studied the sensor logs from a failed patrol. The humans used 12 precisely timed explosive devices that generated harmonic frequencies specifically designed to overload our shield matrices. They would need to understand advanced electromagnetic field theory and have access to detailed technical specifications of our equipment. Studied the tactical display with growing unease. The attacks were no longer random harassment by primitive insurgents. They showed sophisticated understanding of hegemony technology, strategic coordination across multiple continents, and innovative applications of human chemistry and physics that his technical staff couldn't predict or counter. "How are they obtaining technical specifications?" he demanded. "Unknown," admitted. "Our equipment is designed with quantum encryption that should be impossible for their primitive computational systems to decrypt. Yet somehow they are identifying vulnerabilities that our own engineers never considered." What the hegemony technical staff didn't understand was that humans had been reverse engineering superior technology for their entire history. Every captured piece of alien equipment was immediately transported to hidden facilities where teams of engineers, hackers, and scientists worked around the clock to understand not just how it functioned, but how it could be defeated. Dr. James Park had been developing quantum computing algorithms for cryptocurrency mining when the invasion began. Now he led a team of programmers working in an abandoned server farm in South Korea, using modified gaming hardware to crack alien encryption protocols. The aliens' quantum encryption was mathematically unbreakable by conventional methods, but it relied on assumptions about how computational systems would approach the problem. "They're thinking like a civilization that developed quantum computing along the same theoretical pathways they did," James explained to his team during their daily briefing. "But we developed our approach differently because we had to work around technological limitations they never faced. Their encryption assumes we'll use quantum entanglement the same way they do." The breakthrough came when his team realized that human computational approaches, developed through decades of working with inferior hardware, could attack alien encryption from angles that the hegemony had never considered vulnerable. It was like using a crowbar to defeat a lock that had been designed to resist sophisticated key-cutting technology. Within 72 hours of cracking the first communication protocols, resistance networks across the planet had access to real-time intelligence about alien troop movements, supply schedules, and tactical planning. The humans weren't just fighting blind anymore. They were reading the enemy's playbook as it was being written. The hegemony's response was swift and decisive. Admiral or authorized the deployment of hunter-killer teams equipped with advanced sensors and tasked with tracking down resistance leadership. These elite units had successfully eliminated insurgent networks on 17 different worlds, using superior technology and ruthless efficiency to decapitate any organized opposition. The hunter-killers were the hegemony's best soldiers, genetically enhanced for combat and equipped with technology that could track individual biomarkers across continents. They could detect human body heat through 30 meters of solid rock, follow chemical traces that were weeks old, and process tactical information faster than any organic brain should be capable of. They had never encountered prey that understood how to hunt the hunters. Former Navy SEAL Commander William Hayes had spent his career learning how to kill people who were better equipped, better trained, and better supported than he was. The alien hunter-killers were certainly all three, but they were also predictable in ways that human special operations forces had learned not to be. The aliens hunted like apex predators who had never been challenged by anything that could think strategically. They relied on their technological advantages, followed standard tactical doctrine, and assumed that superior capabilities would overcome any resistance they encountered. They had never faced an enemy that would sacrifice tactical advantages to gain strategic ones. Hayes watched the alien strike team approach his position through a network of motion sensors that his team had improvised from components and stolen alien detection equipment. The hunter-killers were following the biomarker trail he had deliberately left while moving through the Colorado wilderness, confident that their superior tracking technology would lead them to their target. What they didn't realize was that the trail led directly into a carefully prepared killing ground that had been designed by someone who understood both human and alien capabilities. The biomarkers were real, but they had been collected from a medical facility and distributed along a route that would funnel the hunter-killers through specific terrain features at predictable times. The aliens entered the box canyon at precisely the moment Hayes had calculated, their formation optimized for assault rather than defense, their attention focused on tracking sensors rather than immediate threats. They had detected the abandoned campsite at the canyon's end and were moving to investigate when the mountainside above them exploded. The avalanche had been triggered by charges placed with mining-grade precision, calculated to create a rock slide that would overwhelm alien shield generators through sheer kinetic mass rather than explosive force. The hunter-killers' personal shields could deflect energy weapons and absorb explosive impacts, but they couldn't negate the physics of 10,000 tons of granite moving at terminal velocity. When the dust settled, Hayes and his team recovered enough intact alien equipment to outfit 3 additional resistance cells. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the hegemony's elite forces could be defeated by humans who understood that superior technology was only an advantage if you could use it effectively. The loss of an entire hunter-killer team sent shock waves through the hegemony command structure. These were soldiers who had never experienced defeat, equipped with weapons that had conquered star systems, supported by intelligence networks that spanned the galaxy. Their elimination by primitive mammals using chemical explosives and rock slides was beyond anything in the hegemony's military experience. Admiral Orc called an emergency conference with his senior staff, demanding explanations for failures that seemed to defy all reasonable military analysis. The humans are not fighting according to any recognized tactical doctrine, reported Chief Intelligence Officer, or they appear to have developed entirely new approaches to asymmetric warfare that specifically target our technological advantages. More concerning, they are adapting and improving their methods faster than we can develop countermeasures. Colonel X studied the tactical reports with growing frustration. Their resistance networks show coordination patterns that suggest centralized planning, but we cannot identify any command structure or leadership hierarchy. They operate independently yet achieve strategic objectives that require complex coordination. It's as if they are thinking collectively without any formal communication systems. What the hegemony officers couldn't understand was that they were facing an enemy that had evolved different approaches to warfare over thousands of years of conflict. Human military thinking had been shaped by fighting other humans who could adapt, innovate, and surprise them. Every human conflict had driven tactical evolution, forcing soldiers and commanders to think beyond standard doctrine and develop new approaches to old problems. The resistance fighters weren't just using their military training. They were using thousands of years of accumulated human knowledge about how to fight, survive, and win against impossible odds. They drew lessons from ancient Chinese strategists, medieval siege warfare, World War guerrilla tactics, and modern special operations doctrine. More importantly, they understood that their enemy was fighting them like they were another galactic military force, which meant the aliens had predictable weaknesses. Coordinated with resistance cells across 3 continents from a hidden command center built into an abandoned coal mine in West Virginia. The facility had been constructed by mining engineers who understood how to build structures that were invisible to orbital sensors, powered by geothermal systems that didn't create detectable energy signatures, and connected to communication networks that used techniques the aliens couldn't intercept. The hegemony is increasing patrols in all sectors, he reported during the daily coordination meeting. But they're deploying additional forces using the same tactical patterns we've already learned to exploit. They're adapting their technology, but not their thinking. Sarah's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system from her position in Siberia. Confirmed. New equipment, same doctrine. They're still moving like they expect to fight other aliens. Recommend we accelerate Phase 2 operations while they're still using predictable deployment patterns. Phase 2 had been developed by a consortium of military planners, intelligence analysts, and academics who had spent months studying alien behavior patterns. Instead of simply harassing occupation forces, the resistance would begin targeting the hegemony's strategic assumptions about Earth and humanity. They would demonstrate that humans were not just a minor inconvenience to be crushed, but a fundamental threat to galactic stability that required completely different approaches to manage. The campaign began with simultaneous operations on 6 continents, each designed to exploit different aspects of hegemony tactical doctrine. In Japan, former Yakuza enforcers used their understanding of urban warfare to eliminate alien administrative personnel in ways that couldn't be prevented by standard security protocols. In Brazil, indigenous hunters demonstrated that humans could disappear into terrain that alien sensors couldn't effectively monitor, then reappear to strike at supply lines before vanishing again. But the most significant operation took place in orbit, where a team of former NASA engineers and military pilots used captured alien technology to build spacecraft that the hegemony's sensors didn't recognize as threats. The ships looked like commercial satellites to alien detection systems, but they carried crews of humans who understood both space operations and asymmetric warfare. Commander Lisa had been training for Mars missions when the invasion began. Now she piloted a stealth ship assembled from salvaged alien components and human ingenuity, approaching the hegemony command vessel with the patience of a submarine commander stalking a target. The ship's engines were based on alien technology, but they had been modified by human engineers who understood how to mask energy signatures from sensors that were designed to detect known threats. The hegemony fleet hung in perfect formation around Earth, confident in their technological superiority, and protected by shields that could deflect anything humans might throw at them from the planet's surface. They had never considered the possibility that humans might come to them instead of waiting to be conquered. Ship drifted through the fleet's outer perimeter using momentum rather than active propulsion, following a trajectory that would bring it alongside Admiral Orr's flagship during the period when the crew would be focused on coordinating ground operations. The approach took 18 hours and required navigation skills that had been developed for threading spacecraft between orbital debris at velocities that left no margin for error. The attack wasn't designed to destroy the command ship, which would have been impossible with human weapons. Instead, it targeted the one thing that even advanced alien technology couldn't easily replace: information. Its team penetrated the flagship's data storage systems and downloaded detailed intelligence about hegemony fleet positions, strategic plans, and most importantly, assessments of human resistance capabilities. They also left behind something that would take the hegemony weeks to discover and months to fully understand. A computer virus developed by human programmers who understood that alien computational systems, however advanced, still relied on logical frameworks that could be exploited by sufficiently creative malicious code. By the time Admiral realized that his command ship had been infiltrated, the Resistance possessed detailed intelligence about every aspect of the hegemony's occupation strategy. More importantly, they had demonstrated that nowhere in the solar system was safe from human retaliation, no matter how advanced the defenses protecting it. The war was entering its final phase, and the hegemony was beginning to understand that they had made a critical mistake in their initial assessment of humanity. The question was whether they would recognize their error in time to avoid a defeat that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. The Hegemony High Council convened in emergency session for the first time in 3 centuries. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the crystal chambers of the council ship, their various forms of communication creating a complex symphony of concern, confusion, and growing alarm. The topic of discussion was unprecedented. A primitive species had not only resisted galactic conquest, but was actively threatening the stability of the hegemony itself. Supreme Chancellor, eldest of the leadership caste, reviewed the reports with mounting disbelief. In 6 months of occupation, the humans had eliminated over 30,000 hegemony personnel, captured enough advanced technology to reverse engineer weapons that threatened their fleet, and demonstrated tactical innovations that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic warfare. Explain to the Council how a species that has not achieved faster-than-light travel has managed to inflict casualties comparable to the war, demanded, his voice resonating through the translation matrices that allowed the diverse species to communicate. Admiral stood before the assembled representatives, his 4 arms gesturing in patterns that conveyed deep frustration mixed with grudging respect. The humans do not fight according to any recorded military doctrine. They have weaponized their own limitations, turning their technological disadvantages into strategic assets. They think in ways that our tactical computers cannot predict or counter. The admission sent ripples of concern through the chamber. The hegemony's computational systems had analyzed the military doctrines of every known species and could predict battlefield outcomes with 97% accuracy. The suggestion that a primitive species could operate outside these parameters threatened the fundamental basis of galactic military science. Counselor of the Crystalline Hierarchy requested clarification. Specify the nature of these unpredictable tactics. Our records indicate that all sapient species develop military strategies based on logical optimization of available resources. Admiral activated the holographic display, showing footage captured from the latest human operations. The humans deliberately sacrifice tactical advantages to achieve strategic objectives. They accept casualties that any rational military force would consider unacceptable in order to gather intelligence about our capabilities. They use weapons that are inferior to ours, but employ them in ways that specifically target our technological advantages. The footage showed human fighters emerging from underground tunnels to attack alien positions with explosive devices that had been precisely calculated to overload shield generators, then disappearing into terrain that orbital sensors couldn't effectively monitor. It showed small groups of humans using captured alien communication equipment to coordinate attacks across multiple continents without any detectable command structure. Most disturbing of all, it showed humans adapting their tactics in real time based on alien responses, creating evolutionary pressure that forced both sides to constantly innovate. They learn faster than we do, Admiral continued. Every engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities, and they share that knowledge instantly across their entire resistance network. Meanwhile, our adaptation cycles require approval from command structures that cannot process their innovations quickly enough to develop effective countermeasures. What the Admiral couldn't explain to the Council was the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. The Resistance had evolved beyond simple insurgency into something that galactic military science had no framework for understanding. They had created a distributed intelligence network that could process tactical information, develop new strategies, and implement coordinated responses faster than any centralized military organization. Doctor coordinated chemical weapons research from 17 different laboratories hidden across Mexico and Central America. Her teams had developed over 40 different compounds specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in alien technology. sharing formulas and improvement suggestions through communication networks that used everything from quantum-encrypted radio transmissions to messages hidden in online gaming platforms. Managed tactical coordination for resistance cells on 4 continents, using organizational principles that had been adapted from everything from military special operations to corporate management theory. The resistance operated like a living organism, with individual cells capable of independent action, but connected to a larger intelligence that could recognize patterns and opportunities that no single human could perceive. Sarah had become something unprecedented in galactic warfare, a sniper who hunted starships. Using weapons that had been reverse-engineered from alien technology and modified with human ingenuity, she could disable spacecraft systems from planetary surface positions. Her innovations were being replicated by marksmen across the globe who had learned to think of orbital targets as extremely high-altitude prey. But the most significant development was happening in hidden research facilities, where human scientists were not just reverse-engineering alien technology, but improving upon it. Dr. James Park's team had broken hegemony quantum encryption so thoroughly that they were now intercepting communications between fleet commanders and the High Council itself. They knew about the emergency session before some council members had been informed of it. "We need to understand what they're planning," said during the daily coordination meeting. "The hegemony has never lost a conquest campaign. They're going to escalate rather than withdraw, which means they're about to try something that hasn't been used against us yet." The intercepted council communications provided the answer. The hegemony was preparing to deploy their ultimate weapon, the extinction protocol. Rather than continuing to fight an insurgency they couldn't understand or predict, they would sterilize the planet from orbit and claim it as an uninhabitable system. It was a strategy they had used 12 times in galactic history against species that had proven too troublesome to conquer conventionally. "Orbital bombardment platforms are being positioned," reported Lisa from her hidden spacecraft. "Energy signatures suggest they're preparing planet-killer weapons. Timeline indicates they'll begin bombardment in 72 hours. The revelation should have meant defeat for humanity. No planetary resistance could survive weapons that could crack continents and boil oceans. The humans had fought brilliantly against occupation forces, but they had no defense against weapons that could destroy their entire world from a safe distance. What the hegemony didn't realize was that 6 months of fighting humans had changed the nature of the conflict in ways that made their traditional ultimate solution impossible to implement. The resistance had captured enough alien spacecraft to build a fleet of converted vessels that were invisible to hegemony sensors. Human engineers had studied alien faster-than-light travel technology and developed modifications that could transport strike teams to any point in the solar system within hours. Most importantly, they had identified the locations of every hegemony installation within 50 light-years of Earth, including the Council ship itself. "They want to destroy our world," told the assembled resistance leaders. "That's not acceptable. Time to show them what happens when you threaten the of a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to kill apex predators." The final operation was coordinated from command centers on 6 continents and involved over 10,000 resistance fighters operating across 12 star systems. While the hegemony fleet prepared to implement the extinction protocol, human strike teams were infiltrating installations that the aliens considered absolutely secure. The attack on the Council ship was led by Commander and a team of former astronauts who had spent months learning to operate in zero-gravity combat environments. They approached the massive vessel using captured alien technology that had been modified to exploit blind spots in hegemony sensor arrays, carrying weapons that had been specifically designed to penetrate the ship's defenses. The Council ship was protected by shields that could deflect stellar-level energy outputs and armor that could withstand impacts from relativistic projectiles. It had never been successfully attacked by any force in galactic history, defended by automated systems that could respond to threats faster than organic reflexes could register them. But it had never been attacked by humans who understood that the most sophisticated defense systems could be defeated by tactics that they hadn't been programmed to recognize as threats. Team didn't try to punch through the ship's defenses. Instead, they used techniques adapted from submarine warfare to approach areas where the massive vessel's sensors couldn't distinguish their small craft from routine maintenance activities. They attached themselves to the ship's hull using magnetic clamps that had been reverse-engineered from alien construction equipment, then used cutting tools that generated precisely the right energy frequencies to create gaps in the armor without triggering defensive responses. The infiltration took 18 hours and required navigation through security systems that had been designed by civilizations that were thousands of years more advanced than humanity. But the humans had advantages that the ship's designers had never anticipated. They were smaller than any sapient species in galactic records, more flexible than any known biological form, and capable of holding their breath longer than the ship's atmospheric sensors considered possible for intelligent life. Once inside, they didn't try to damage critical systems or capture important facilities. Instead, they did something that no species had ever attempted in the history of galactic warfare. They took hostages. Supreme Chancellor was reviewing the final bombardment authorization when his private chambers were suddenly filled with armed humans who had somehow materialized through ventilation systems that were supposed to be too small for sapient infiltration. The humans wore atmospheric suits that had been cobbled together from alien technology and human ingenuity, carried weapons that shouldn't have been able to function in the ship's electromagnetic environment, and moved with coordination that indicated extensive training in zero-gravity combat. "Do not move," commanded the human leader, her voice transmitted through translation equipment that had been hacked from hegemony communication systems. "We are here to negotiate the immediate withdrawal of all hegemony forces from the Sol system." The concept of hostage-taking was so foreign to galactic military doctrine that security systems didn't have protocols for responding to it. The hegemony had never encountered a species that would risk everything to capture enemy leadership rather than simply destroying them. The tactical computers that monitored the ship couldn't classify the human actions as either an assassination attempt or a rescue operation, leaving the automated defenses in a state of confused paralysis. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the hegemony's military structure. Strike teams had infiltrated 17 major installations, capturing key personnel and demonstrating that no facility in the galaxy was secure from human infiltration. The Resistance had turned their greatest weakness, their primitive technology and small physical size, into advantages that allowed them to operate inside enemy territory in ways that no other species could match. "Your terms?" asked, his translator struggling to convey concepts that had no equivalent in galactic standard. "Complete withdrawal from our solar system," the human commander replied. "Formal recognition of Sol as an independent system under human sovereignty, and a treaty establishing that any future contact between our species will be conducted under diplomatic protocols rather than conquest attempts." The demands were unprecedented in galactic history. No primitive species had ever been in a position to dictate terms to the hegemony, and the idea of granting sovereignty to a civilization that couldn't even achieve faster-than-light travel violated fundamental assumptions about galactic hierarchy. But the alternative was equally unprecedented: the complete collapse of hegemony military credibility throughout the galaxy. News of human victories was already spreading through the communication networks that connected galactic civilization. If word spread that humans had successfully captured the High Council itself, it would trigger rebellions on 100 conquered worlds and destabilize the entire galactic political structure. Admiral Or received his orders through quantum-encrypted communication from the Council ship. "Begin immediate withdrawal of all hegemony forces from the Sol system." The extinction protocol was cancelled, the fleet would return to base, and diplomatic contact with humanity would be established through appropriate channels. The Admiral stared at the withdrawal orders with emotions that had no parallel in hegemony history. They were retreating from a species that had no space navy, no energy weapons, and no apparent understanding of galactic politics. Yet somehow, that same species had achieved something that no force in the galaxy had ever accomplished. They had defeated the hegemony through tactics that made their primitive technology irrelevant. As the last hegemony transport lifted off from Earth's surface, Resistance fighters emerged from hiding places that had sheltered them for months of warfare. They watched the alien fleet retreat beyond the edge of the solar system, carrying with them a lesson that would reshape galactic politics for generations. Technological superiority was meaningless when fighting an enemy that refused to accept the rules of conventional warfare. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage, not through advancement or diplomacy, but through a demonstration that the most dangerous species in the universe was one that had spent millions of years learning how to survive against impossible odds. The galaxy would remember the lesson, and no species would ever again make the mistake of underestimating the humans of Sol 3. Stood on a hilltop in West Virginia, watching the alien ships disappear into the starfield above. The war was over, but he knew it was really just the beginning. Humanity now had access to faster-than-light travel, advanced weapons technology, and detailed intelligence about galactic civilization. More importantly, they had proven that human innovation could overcome any technological disadvantage. The Resistance had achieved something unprecedented. They had defeated a galactic empire not by becoming like their enemies, but by remaining fundamentally human. They had weaponized their creativity, their adaptability, and their refusal to accept that any problem was impossible to solve. The galaxy had never encountered a species like humanity before, and it never would again. Earth was free, and the universe would never be the same.